Summertime is here, and I wanted to do a recipe that would work for us today in the summertime, but yet comes right out of the 18th century cookbooks. And I found this wonderful summertime treat called a trifle. Now, I went and looked specifically in Amelia Simmons' little cookbook from 1797. I wanted to see what an American cook thought about a dish like this. So I went digging in, trying to find just the right recipe. I run into this trifle recipe, I read it, it's just short and sweet like so many of the recipes in this particular cookbook. I loved it. I said, how does this compare to earlier trifle recipes? So I thought, let's look back in Hannah Glass's cookbook from 30 or 40, 50 years earlier. And guess what? It's exactly the same recipe. Amelia Simmons just copied it. So we're gonna be doing this trifle recipe. Now, in one sense, this is really easy. In another sense, we're making a lot of different components to put this together. So short recipe, but we're gonna actually have to do 3 or 4 other kinds of recipes to put this together. Now, what really is a trifle, and do we still eat a trifle today? These are really good questions. And a trifle, it has a lot of different meanings, the word, but in a sense here, it just means a little and simple and kind of a flighty dish. And since it's a kind of a light dessert, it fits that well. The trifle word has been used as this kind of dessert for at least a couple hundred years, even before this recipe was written. So 16th century, they're talking about trifles. And a trifle in this particular circumstance will be a sweet biscuit soaked in wine, then covered with custard. Then we'll have a sort of a whipped topping on top of that with a garnish of fruit. So anybody would recognize this as a wonderful little dessert. Over time, the trifle does change consistency. Sometimes it's a very simple sort of custardy dish. By the time we get to the 18th century, it has become this more complicated dish. Obviously, it is not for a poor person. Most poor people are not going to be eating trifles. This is full of expensive things like cream and sugar and eggs, but it would most likely show up in a middling household's table and obviously on the table of the rich. The recipe calls for garnishing with sweetmeats or with flowers. We're going to be using raspberries. So black raspberries, I just picked these. This is the very end of black raspberry season, so I just went out into the woods and picked these. The question is, in the 18th century, would they have access to this sort of thing, even in the cities? And the answer is yes. People in the country would go ahead and pick, especially wild crops like this, and then bring them into the cities and sell them. So there were street vendors selling fresh fruit. There were other vendors, maybe like grocers, that would have fruit that was brought into them. It's a constant thing being brought into the cities and a great way of making money for people in rural areas. So pick these fruits and bring them in, and the seasons are always changing. So around here, mulberries were good about a month ago. And then 2 weeks ago, the black raspberries came into season. And now we're at the very end of black raspberry season, and blackberry season will start. Same thing's happening in the 18th century. And those people that are working in the summertime are doing that very thing, harvesting them and then bringing them into the city. Let's do a quick reading of this recipe. A trifle. Fill a dish with biscuit finely broken, rusk, and spiced cake. Wet with wine, then pour a good boiled custard, not too thick, over the rusk. Put a syllabub over that, garnish with jelly and flowers. You know, this recipe, of course, sounds easy, but of course we need rusks, or we need biscuit or spiced cake. Obviously we need some boiled custard, and then we're gonna have to make a syllabub. So we've got a lot of separate, smaller recipes we're gonna have to find here. None of them are very difficult at all. Now we do have the question right up front where fill the dish with biscuit finely broken, rusk, and spiced cake. I think the recipe really means any one of these 3 things, and they all can be very similar in the time period. Spiced cake, rusk, or biscuit. And I'm gonna use one of the rusk recipes that's in this same cookbook. We actually just flip over a page or 2 and we have a rusk recipe. And the rusk recipe is just very simple. We just take butter, we take sugar, we take flour after that, and we make it into basically little biscuits. Now, rusk, if we look at the recipes and we think about rusks, it's supposed to be kind of like a dried bread in some circumstances, in some definitions, but obviously from this recipe, it's just a sweet biscuit. Let's make the rusks. This recipe, again, is very simple. What's very interesting is there are as many as, 6 recipes for rusks in here, all very, very similar. We're gonna start off our recipe with butter and sugar and cream those together. The recipe makes a lot, say 5 pounds of rusks. We're gonna cut this recipe in half, so we need 1/4 pound of butter and 1/4 pound of sugar. And then we'll take 2 pounds of flour and add it to that, and again, mix this up. Now our dry ingredients are fully mixed. We can add in our milk and our emptins, as this recipe calls for it. That really is just liquid yeast. So I'm gonna add, again, about 1 cup of liquid yeast and about 1 cup of milk. And this should make a very soft dough. Once our soft dough is all mixed up, we're gonna set it aside to rest for a little bit, about an hour. But really, if you want to hurry these up, you don't have to let it rest that long. It can be very similar to the Whigs recipe in that we don't really expect this to necessarily fluff up a whole bunch. It doesn't have to. It can, that's good. But if it doesn't fluff up a whole bunch, it will spring in the oven. They'll be a little more dense, but for a recipe like this, that might actually work out better. So after that has risen 15 minutes to approximately an hour, we're gonna pull it up into these little biscuit shapes, and we're gonna bake it in a brisk oven at, say, 400 degrees, probably a little less than 15 minutes, depends on your oven. Then these rusks will be done. We'll pull them out of the oven and let them cool. We're gonna go ahead and work on the custard part of this recipe. I got our little saucepan here, and we're gonna about half fill it with cream, and I'm gonna warm that up over the fire with a stick of cinnamon. Now this, I'm just sort of bringing up to a warm temperature. We don't want it to boil, we just want it to get nice and warmish. And then we're gonna go ahead and sweeten it, and then we're gonna temper eggs and slowly bring those into this custard. And at a very low temperature, we're gonna keep stirring that up, whisking it up until we get it into a custard form. Again, the recipe for the trifle calls for a custard that is not too thick. Many of these boiled or baked custards turn out to be like a very stiff pudding. We don't want that. So we just want basically the nice soft custard interior. Our syllabub starts off with 3 egg whites. We're gonna put that in the bowl and start whisking it a little bit. I'm gonna toss in some lemon zest, and then we're gonna pour in some of this sweet white wine. We don't need probably a bunch of that. This is just to, give it some flavor here. And we're gonna continue to whisk this, and then we're gonna add in a portion of heavy cream. And obviously there aren't exact, we're gonna whisk this up until it starts to froth. Now this probably isn't gonna get as frothy as a regular whipped cream. So some of the recipes call for pulling off the froth and then putting that into a different dish and then whisking it some more. Again, this isn't gonna build up into a stiff peak. It is just going to give you some, nice fluffiness to the top of this dish. Let's construct our trifle. We start off very simply with some of our biscuit or our rusk, whatever we're using here. We're gonna crumble them up and then pour in a little bit of white wine. We should pick a nice sweet wine here, not something that's too dry. And then on goes the custard. We're gonna pour the custard in, and then on top of that, we're gonna put in the fluffiness of our syllabub. And you could even use one of the whipped cream recipes in the 18th century, but the syllabub is kind of what calls for in this recipe. After that, we're going to garnish on top with whatever we've got, and in this case, we're going to use these wonderful wild black raspberries. Our trifle is ready. The raspberries on top, of course, make it look beautiful, and the only way to really find out what's going on here is to try it out, and I need to get down to a little bit of the rusks and get a little bit of the custard and everything all at the same time, which isn't easy to do. That's the fun part of this. It's sort of multi-layered, so we get to try a bunch of different things at once. We have the sweet wine at the bottom, the custard layer, which gives you a nice thickness. The wine, of course, is a thing we don't use as much in desserts, but it does give it a really interesting and more fun, complex flavor. And of course, you can change it up a little bit with each kind of fruit that you use. Putting something like this together is complicated, but it makes a really fun process. And part of 18th century cooking is about the process, learning about each individual component and putting them together, the ingredients that you're going to be using. You get to choose. This is a real dish from 300 years ago. So we need to have fun with it and enjoy it and cook together with other people. This is such a great and wonderful recipe for that.